Hi, I wanted to go over how to do your English language learner lesson plan that you're going to be turning in soon, just to clarify some points and make sure that you have every opportunity to be successful. So we're in Teams. So when you're in Teams, go to Assignments, and we're going to go to the ELL Lesson Plan assignment, and you'll see the instructions there. You're going to create a lesson plan or adapt an existing one using the SIOP lesson plan template, which is below. Make sure you watch your video on how to write this lesson plan, which is what you're watching right now, but also your two SIOP videos that are SIOP Day 1 and SIOP Day 2 to make sure that you understand what SIOP is before you attack that lesson plan. There are also some example lesson plans here for you to take a look at from previous students. So I try to have a little bit of a range in the models that I posted. So there's one that is a student who wrote a elementary lesson plan, a high school plan, and then I did music as well because that can sometimes be challenging for music majors to think through how to do a lesson plan in the SIOP model. So also you have the template below, and so we're going to click on that now. You have to use this template, so make sure you open it and then save as your name and your SIOP. So just like Blackburn SIOP would be fine. I need to take this stuff out later because it's now on our Teams forever, so I apologize for that if you're viewing it. But let's take a look. So I'm scrolling back up. I started this earlier as an example to kind of walk you through it. So your topic is just what the lesson's going to be about for the day. Class, for me, it's English, 9th grade. The date, and then your content objectives. Go ahead and write them the way you learned in Foundations of Teaching. I just wrote a shortened version, and we do talk about that in SIOP, that you want to simplify your objectives to share those with the students. So when I taught high school, I usually had, we will be able to explicate the poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. So or some even later in my career, I even took this part out and just said explicate the poem. So I would start with the verb because, again, you don't want to overwhelm the students with unnecessary jargon. But try to keep your objectives, your content objectives, to a minimum for this lesson because it's going to be a little bit challenging enough for you to think through this lesson from the perspective of two different levels of English learners. And so I just want to keep things simple for you to just get your feet wet with it a little bit, okay? So for the sake of this, actually I'm going to add one more objective for my lesson. The students will be able to identify the imagery in the poem, okay? So I have that they're going to explicate the poem, identify the imagery. And so to be able to explicate the poem, I think to myself, what do they need to do with language to be able to explicate this poem? And so for one thing, there's rhyme used in the poem. So I want my English learners to know what rhyme is and be able to identify it in the poem. They would also need to define and identify imagery in the poem as well. So maybe using picture cues and a word bank. So if you look here of what I've put earlier, I start with my language function. So define and identify is what I want them to do with language. Rhyme is their content stem. All the students in my class are going to be looking at rhyme today. Now, what's going to change for the English learners is they may be the only ones using the their native dictionary, okay? I might have everybody use the highlighters, but the beginning English language learners are going to use a native dictionary if necessary. Then I have my emerging students, and so I say define and identify rhyme using highlighters again, and a partner who is English speaking. So that partner can help them to see those commonalities between the words that rhyme. Okay. And so for imagery, I might let them, because images, that's something like painting a picture in one's mind with words. So I might be able to use some picture cues to help the beginning student for that objective, okay, that language objective. Then for the emerging student, they also are going to identify and define imagery, but they might only use a word bank because I want them to start relying on their use of language because they are starting to be able to produce it a little bit, okay? So you want to make sure that these supports using, and then the support is consistent with the level at which that student is on. And you are going to be writing your lesson plan with the beginning ELL and the emerging ELL, meeting their needs. Okay, so you're assuming that you have a level 1 and a level 2 ELL in your classroom. Okay. So here I have key vocabulary, so I'd put in rhyme, I'm going to put in imagery as well. I might also add words from the poems themselves or the poem itself that they may not have heard of particular words before. Native dictionary I need, highlighters, picture cues. I'll have to make sure I have those created ahead of time. What I love about the SIOP model, the SIOP template, is that it actually has you put in the higher order questions that you're going to ask during the lesson. If you remember from the lecture, over 80% of the questions that teachers ask any class of students, not just English learners, but any class of students, over 80% are lower order questions. And so we need to do better on that. And so there really should be a place on all lesson plans where you actually write down what higher order questions you're going to ask during the lesson. So here I just thought of one off the top of my head. Why is this poem symbolic of the themes from the movie The Outsiders, or the novel even The Outsiders? In that novel, there is a character who recites the poem Nothing Gold Can Stay by Robert Frost. And so why would the author pick that poem for their novel? So the next part is where you really get into the lesson. So you can see there's a little place for you to record how much time each activity is going to take, each part of your lesson. That helps you with pacing. So I do encourage you to do that part. For the anticipatory set, just like with Madeline Hunter in your Madeline Hunter model that you learned in Foundations of Teaching, we look at the set as being something where you grab the student's attention. And a great way to do that is to link to their experience, but then you also want to link to their prior learning as well. So when you're building background for the English learner, think about how are you going to link this lesson to their experience, to their own personal experience, and then link it to their learning as well, okay, through their prior learning. So think about how you will do that and just articulate that here, what's going to happen there. It might be a video that you show. It might be asking them a question about their own lives. And then with a link to learning, that could be, I would actually put in here prior learning. So what did they learn yesterday that is going to somersault into what they're learning today, if that makes sense. And then point to keywords of the day and have students repeat them after me. That's what I would do in my anticipatory set to introduce the new words of the day. So imagery, I would have them repeat the word imagery, rhyme, rhyme, so that my English learners aren't by themselves and having to repeat it. I have the whole class repeat it so that they get an opportunity to articulate that new word that's maybe new to them in English. Okay. Now the development and practice, what's different from Madeline Hunter is that SIOP is kind of just pushing development and guided and independent practice all into one. And so I kind of like that personally because I find that my development and practice aren't necessarily sequential. So I didn't have a problem with this with SIOP. but they have you highlight the different student activities that are going to be happening in the lesson. So what I want you to do is color coordinate them with what's going to happen in your lesson. So for example, with your scaffolding, what is that going to look like? So if I'm using modeling, then I'm going to highlight that in a particular color. So I chose green. And then down below, I say, okay, first I'm going to recite the poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay, emphasizing the rhyme pattern. Okay. Next, in guided, I'm going to have the students use their highlighters to identify the matching rhymes. And then I tell you in parentheses, level 1 students will use a dictionary to help them understand what I mean by rhyme. Level 2s will work with a partner. Okay. Perhaps I will go around and help the level 1s on my own. Okay, so in parentheses, I said what is going to be different for my English learners for that activity. All right, and then I highlighted what's going to be happening there. And then in grouping, so perhaps the next activity that I do will be whole class. Then I would highlight that a particular color. So let's just say, oops, I'm still getting used to this computer. It's new to me. Okay, so let's make it pink. It's a little bright, but we'll deal with it. Okay, and then below, I'm going to say next, we will share the rhyme as a class and identify the rhyme scheme. Okay, I'm going to put that in hot pink because that is whole class. So anywhere there's whole class, I'm going to highlight it in bright pink. Okay. And so you just do the same thing throughout. So looking at the processes, hopefully you will have some small group partners work happening, because if you remember the gradual release of responsibility that I talked about in the SIOP lectures is really helpful to English learners, okay? So hopefully you will have small group and partner work somewhere in there. And then the processes, how are they working on each different language process throughout? So try to get as many of those as you can in your lesson. And then the hands-on work, meaningful connection to the objectives as well. All of those are characteristics of SIOP. So you want to see how many of those you can get. Okay, I don't expect you to get them all, so don't freak out or sweat over this. But some of the big ones are to have as many of these 4 processes, because you want your English learners to practice using English in your particular content area. And then with grouping, small group and partners are helpful as well. Okay, modeling is helpful for English learners as well. Okay. All right, and then we move on to closure. And so with closure, you're going to, 2 parts of that are to review your key vocabulary and review the key content. And so how are you going to do that? Individually, with the group, written, oral, how is that going to look? So again, just use your little key. So highlight in a particular color and then highlight that under the instruction of how you're going to review. So let's just say I choose to review. I will review new vocabulary using the fly swatter game. Okay, so, oops, I spelled vocabulary wrong, sorry. And so this would be not as individual, but as the whole class, right? So whatever, I would highlight that under group. I would highlight as well where I describe how we're going to review the key vocabulary. Okay. and then how I would also do the same thing with how I'm going to review the content of the class. All right, so that's it. That's your ELL lesson plan. So you're welcome to use a lesson that you've already written, but you need to talk about what each part of your lesson is going to look like for your English learner. Just put that in parentheses and bold so that I can see that you are thinking through what that learner needs throughout the lesson so that they can be successful, so that they're not like Rosa sitting there like a deer in the headlights and missing opportunities to learn, right? Because we're going to do better by our students. Okay, guys, have fun with it. And please let me know if you have any questions or concerns. I'd be happy to help. Thank you. Have a great day.